Hello, how are you? Are you one of those people who just finished eating and immediately has that craving for something sweet? Or maybe you even ate enough, but you spend the whole day feeling like you're fighting a hunger that won't stop. It feels like your brain is never satisfied, right? You organize yourself for this healthy lifestyle process, for balanced eating, but often what sabotages you are your hormones. Metabolic hormones work like a row of dominoes, lined up one right next to the other. And when one of them gets out of place, it can cause this domino effect, pushing the next one and the next and the next. And suddenly you enter this cycle of having more hunger, more cravings for sweets, accumulating more belly fat. And this whole weight loss issue becomes increasingly difficult for you. Today in this video, I'm going to explain to you how poorly controlled hormones can really hinder your weight loss and what you can do to improve that. Stay until the end because you won't want to miss it. Before we start, I want to ask if you would like to lose weight, how many pounds, or if not, if you are satisfied with your weight. Write it for me down here in the comments. One thing that is very important for us to understand is that our brain does not count calories, even though nowadays we are constantly counting everything, downloading apps and all that. Inside the brain, there is a natural command center that controls things like hunger, satiety, energy expenditure, and the ease with which we store fat. But this center doesn't see our plate itself and won't know if at that moment you ate 500 calories or 1,200 in just that meal, It works by receiving messages sent precisely by hormones, which are the signaling agents of our organism. So they send the message like there's enough energy, I'm hungry, I need to eat, I'm very stressed, store energy because food might run out, we're low on energy here. So based on these messages that the hormones send, the brain decides how much hunger you will feel, how much of the food will actually be used as energy, how much will be stored, and even the intensity of your cravings for certain foods like more carbohydrates, more fat, more sweets. So obviously food matters a lot, especially because it helps to modulate hormone signaling. But the conductor of this whole delicate process is precisely the correct secretion of these very important hormones at the right times. I'm going to explain to you here how 3 main hormones can orchestrate this matter of hunger, satiety, and help in the weight loss process. And later I'll even talk about one that acts directly on women, which makes this issue even worse for the female sex. Of course, the first domino we have lined up there is insulin, right? And there's the whole issue of insulin resistance because insulin works a lot with cortisol. And in the morning, it's natural for us to have a physiological expected spike in cortisol to help us wake up and even to help the liver release energy for this very important moment of waking up. The problem is when breakfast is poorly balanced. When, for example, it has a large amount of carbohydrates and high glycemic index carbohydrates, such as a lot of white bread, cookies, crackers, cream cracker, waffles, donuts, sugary cereal like Frosted Flakes and cakes. So these foods are quickly digested, glucose levels rise very fast, and then there's also a signal from our brain showing, look, glucose levels are very high, you need to secrete a lot of insulin to organize this glucose to store it inside the cell. So when this pattern repeats for many days, many months, and even some years, right, a continuous pattern in a person's life, and especially in people who are sedentary, who are more genetically predisposed, or who already have an accumulation of visceral fat, the cells begin to respond less to this insulin secretion, generating the condition of insulin resistance. So, the pancreas essentially needs to work much harder to produce and secrete increasingly larger amounts of insulin, just to achieve the exact same effect that it used to get quite easily with a much smaller amount of insulin. So your body ends up being constantly exposed to very high insulin levels throughout the entire day, which can also make it much harder to use stored fat as a source of energy. That's precisely why so many people struggle to lose weight. It can really feel like there's something constantly holding you back, breaking this process. And often it is this person's hyperinsulinemia. So this also causes the primary energy source that is currently in excess in the body, right, the fat, to be very poorly utilized. We know that insulin is an anabolic hormone, so it worsens catabolism, worsens our body's energy burning, and also generates spikes and drops in glucose. It becomes that glucose roller coaster. So often, since the insulin secretion was very high, the effect right after ends up being a drop in blood sugar. And this causes hunger to reappear very quickly, that tiredness, that prostration, and specifically the craving to eat more sweets and carbohydrates. The second hormone, which is also all related to everything, is leptin, which is when our brain thinks we are going through deprivation, going through hunger. Leptin is a hormone produced by fat cells to tell the brain that there is already enough energy stored in our body. It's as if it's for the body to know, I already have enough stock here, enough reserves, I don't need to eat that much. So people with more fat will produce more leptin, right? Because it is related to our body's fat percentage. But in many cases, the brain simply stops responding properly to this signal and creates a phenomenon known precisely as leptin resistance, right? Which is this key hunger signaling hormone. Since it has a strong resistance to this hormone, since it doesn't really see this hormone well, the brain continually believes in this false scarcity and keeps the hunger signal dangerously high. So you finish lunch, but you still find yourself thinking about food, especially after eating foods that are high in ultra-processed ingredients. These foods can strongly activate the brain's dopamine-based reward system, reinforcing the desire for highly palatable foods and creating that immediate sense of reward even when you're not physically hungry. So, leptin, which is supposed to be the satiety hormone, might be as if it were on mute in the person's body, causing this hunger signal to always remain elevated. There is also another hormone in this domino sequence, which is precisely ghrelin, which is the one that sounds the hunger alarm. It is as if it were the complete opposite of leptin. While leptin makes you feel full, makes you feel good, ghrelin is the opposite. It is actually produced primarily by the stomach itself, and it signals that it's time to eat. It's associated with those familiar sensations of an empty, growling stomach and the urge to eat. And under normal circumstances, its levels drop after a meal. But it can be heavily influenced by a bad night's sleep, which profoundly alters this hormonal balance. So studies have already shown that very short nights of poor quality, very shallow sleep, not very restorative for the body, right, increase ghrelin production and impair leptin's action. So you wake up tired, the hunger signal comes on more intensely, and leptin decreases, so satiety becomes weaker. So it's not just a lack of discipline, it's actually a real biological imbalance. There's also another hormone that's somewhat related to all of them, which is cortisol. Cortisol, we talk about it more and more these days because the current trend is for people to have increased cortisol levels. It's as if it were that fire alarm, that danger alarm that never turns off. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, morning cortisol is actually an ally for us. The problem arises when stress becomes chronic and when you're consistently not getting enough sleep, because that can disrupt the body's normal cortisol rhythm. When you wake up and immediately consume a large amount of caffeine, when you wake up already stressed, knowing you'll hit traffic, when you already have worries about work, about your children, that morning rush, that constant anxiety, that habit of picking up your phone and looking at bad news, the brain interprets this stressful routine as a continuous threat. So it causes the liver to release more glucose into the bloodstream, demands more from insulin, and increases the craving for high-calorie foods. So this ends up becoming a cycle because this domino effect becomes consolidated. You sleep poorly, ghrelin goes up, leptin works worse, cortisol remains elevated due to stress, glucose and insulin rise, visceral fat accumulation increases, insulin resistance worsens, and leptin resistance worsens even more. It becomes this cycle. You get stuck on that hamster wheel, you're trapped there. On the other hand, there is a natural break in our body, which is also being talked about a lot these days, which is GLP-1. When we talk about GLP-1, I'm sure you already know that it's related to Mounjaro, Ozempic, Wegovy, those weight loss pens, right? but it is a hormone that is released by our own intestine after meals. And it acts precisely by trying to balance all of this. It reduces hunger, it increases satiety, it slows down gastric emptying, and it improves the insulin response. It improves this insulin sensitivity. So there are these modern medications, obviously with this medication, right, with this injectable hormone, but the body itself can be stimulated to produce it naturally through healthy habits. So things you can do to try to balance all these hormones and get your axis back on track for your weight loss process is, first of all, always meals rich in protein and fiber, but in all meals. They help slow down digestion, stimulate the secretion of GLP-1, stimulate the secretion of leptin, improve this issue of satiety. So when I say this, it's also to have protein and fiber at breakfast, at your afternoon snack, not just at lunch and dinner, which are usually the most organized meals, right? Usually for the main meals, we tend to take some time, plan, defrost, make a menu, but breakfast, snacks, and even a late night snack, if you have one, are meals that are more, pushed aside. So remember that they are also super important for controlling your hormones. The second very important thing is to improve your gut health, the gut microbiota. We know that these fibers I mentioned as well, which also help with satiety, ferment in the gut, and also produce their byproducts, right, the short-chain fatty acids, it increases the number of beneficial bacteria that like these fibers to grow. And this also favors the secretion and release of GLP-1. So that's super interesting. Another very important thing is regular physical activity. We already know that regular physical activity improves overall insulin sensitivity, provides a sense of well-being, right? Makes us feel better. And all of this is also very much related to improving the weight loss process as a whole. There is also a hormone, which in this case affects women, that is estradiol. Because as the years go by, the tendency is for women, when entering the premenopause period, to have a decrease, obviously, in the production of estradiol secretion in the body. It has a vital role during a woman's fertile life. It preserves muscle mass, helps with insulin sensitivity, and even controls the distribution of fat in the female body, giving it that hourglass figure, that curvy look, which is so associated with the female body. But when we enter menopause, we experience a drop in estradiol and a real yet rarely discussed metabolic change, where we increase abdominal fat accumulation, reduce muscle mass, insulin sensitivity decreases, and much more. So it's as if another piece of the women's domino effect falls, right? Making things more difficult. So to manage this issue of low estradiol, which will happen to women, you have to do strength training. You have to have, once again, adequate protein consumption to maintain and preserve lean mass, but also to help with insulin sensitivity and assist in GLP-1 production. So this ends up becoming an indispensable tool for women to preserve this lean mass, increase muscle mass, and keep the metabolism active. This is how women can lose weight during menopause, by maintaining and increasing muscle tissue, not just thinking about walking, running, cycling, and so on. Of course, cardiovascular exercise is super important for heart health and for the total calorie expenditure, but muscle mass, strength training has to be the priority for women. Also remember that sleeping 7 to 9 hours a night is fundamental at any stage of life you are in to be able to balance ghrelin, leptin, and the issue of cortisol itself. Keeping fixed sleep and wake times also helps with this issue of cortisol secretion. Tell me below if you knew that hormones could impact the weight loss process this much. And of these tips, which ones are you going to start putting into practice today? I would love to read your comment. Remember to leave a like on the video. It helps me a lot, and to share it with those you think will like it and those who need it. Let's expand this chain of kindness. That's what I want here with the channel. See you next time. Bye.